Welcome to OECD Podcasts, where policy meets people.
Today, we're going to dive into the future of sustainable urban growth with Urban Partners, and they're a leader in transforming cities into thriving, inclusive, and sustainable spaces. From shaping vibrant communities to supporting local businesses and infrastructure, their approach reimagines how urban areas can grow while tackling pressing environmental and social challenges. Urban Partners' unique model integrates sustainability into every facet of development, from green building practices to renewable energy, while forging long-term collaborations between public and private sectors. I'm Shayne MacLachlan from the OECD, and today I'm joined by Jesse Shapins, who is co-head of neighbourhood investments at Urban Partners, who will also join us at the OECD Local Development Forum in Greater Copenhagen on the 24th and 25th of September this year. So today we're going to explore how the work of Urban Partners aligns with local development goals. We're also going to look at the role of partnerships in driving change and the future of sustainable cities. Hi Jesse, thanks so much for joining us today on OECD Podcasts.
Great to be with you today. Thanks for having me.
Super. Well, let's launch straight in. Urban Partners, the group for which you work, has a strong focus on decarbonising the built environment and creating thriving neighbourhoods. That's very much the mantra of your group. Can you share with us a specific example of a successful project where you've seen impacts on emissions reduction and, potentially on community well-being? And maybe you could tell us a little bit about the challenges and successes as part of this process.
Absolutely. That's a great question and a great place to start. But just to make sure that everybody here listening has a little context. So Urban Partners is a Copenhagen-based investment management firm. So we manage over 21 billion euros of capital, and we put that to work to really be a private partner to achieving societal goals and supporting cities and governments in achieving what they need in terms of the climate, in terms of social well-being, and do that on behalf also of institutional investors, pension funds that also believe in that agenda. And so in terms of decarbonization, it's been a major priority for us for quite a long time. Ahead of many others in the industry, we were really sort of investing internally in R&D for how to work with new materials. Almost about 7 years ago, there was a project called Upcycle Studios, where here in Copenhagen, we built a series of apartment buildings using materials that were coming from the metro that was being constructed in the city. And that itself proved to actually reduce the emissions on those buildings by 45% in terms of the embodied emissions by using materials that had already been sort of harvested in their carbon, could then sort of be directed towards that construction. We also have really kind of continued to work with that in more recent projects. An example is a new construction that's just outside my window here in the North Harbor of Copenhagen. It's something we call Ripple Residence. Will be the sort of lowest per kilo carbon multi-story apartment building in Denmark to date. It'll be just under 5 kilos. And that means really working with different materials. So there's a lot of wooden construction, even into the kind of bathroom pods that are in the building, so that we really take seriously our responsibility to not just as a developer manage carbon in terms of the upfront process, but also then in the operational side, we do a lot of work to make sure that the kind of energy efficiency of the spaces and the technologies that we bring basically result in a net zero building. You also asked about the social well-being, and that is something that is also incredibly important to us. Because I think one of my favorite quotes, Jan Gehl, famous urbanist here from Copenhagen, he says, a great city is not just green buildings. So, we can do and we need to do so much more on decarbonizing our buildings, but a great place is human, and it is the relationship of people, and it's the social equality and the social experience of places. And so we've done a lot of work on this as well. I think a project that I think, inspired me actually to move my family across the Atlantic to join this company 2.5 years ago is hearing about the work we've been doing for many years alongside social housing companies and the municipality in a neighborhood called Tingbjerg on the outskirts of Copenhagen, where it was an area that was master planned in the 1950s, a very ambitious vision for the future of building a great place for the growing middle class of Denmark. That area over time became slightly more challenged socially. You started to see a rise in crime. You started to see less employment, classic kind of socioeconomic indicators. The municipality, alongside the social housing companies that own the area, alongside the residents in the neighborhood and sort of civic institutions, all came together and also invited a private partner to join them, which was us. I'm very grateful to say, to then work on a new vision for how to bring the neighborhood forward and improve on those key kind of socioeconomic indicators by actually investing in better schools, cultural centers, in the case of the municipality, but also introducing new types of housing into the area that would allow for families that were more upwardly mobile to also stay in the area. So you get a greater social mix. And just 2 years ago, the neighborhood really moved on a lot of these key indicators. The sort of assessment was that it had sort of come off a national list of most vulnerable neighborhoods because the improvement in high school graduations, the improvement in unemployment, the improvements in overall well-being of the residents. And I think important to note, this was an area that has had historically a very large population of people not born in Denmark or have heritage outside of Denmark. That percentage did not change in this period of time. So it's a testament also to, there's a lot of discussion in OECD countries and in, cities around the world in terms of diversity. This, I think, is a great example of you can work with a very diverse population. And of course, a very diverse population can also, when coming together in the right ways, achieve really significant social progress when working well together.
Yeah, for sure. And certainly picking up on that idea of working well together, it seems that partnerships are central to the strategy, indeed, of urban partners, and especially, I guess, in large-scale urban developments. I think a well-known one is the Railway City project in Copenhagen, where you live. But yeah, just wondering if you could unpack that a little bit, how you've navigated, I guess, some of the complexities of bringing together different stakeholders, I guess, from municipalities to private sector partners, to indeed create that shared vision and create that momentum, and maybe some of the lessons that you've learned from these collaborations with the partners.
Yeah, so as you noted, sort of our name is Urban Partners, and that name is intentional because we see ourselves working in partnership on many different levels to create better cities. And the example that you mentioned of the railway district in Copenhagen is a really good one. This is the largest area of undeveloped land in central Copenhagen. It is the old freight rail yards, just close to the central train station. And it's an area that has historically been owned by the state rail company, and also a part of it owned by the state real estate company. And those two landowners over many years worked together with the municipality and local residents associations, the local council from the neighborhood, to basically imagine what this area could become so it served a better purpose for the city as the freight rail was decommissioned. And there's some rail functions that exist there today, but by and large, it's an area that is not serving the city's needs in terms of affordable housing, in terms of green space, in terms of providing places for people to work and live well together. So there's a long process, and I mention this because I think for the partnership topic, I think what's really important is acknowledging how all the different actors can most effectively work together. So there's a really important role for municipality, in this case, to be setting the long-term agenda for where Copenhagen's growth should be directed, the areas of the city that make sense for new development to take place, also the character and quality of that new development, so that it is something that is actually delivering on the promises of a mix of housing and the promises of recreational areas and green space. And that is something the municipality really brought to the work with those landowners. And then we came into this project as a private partner as the need arose to actually have then an investor and developer to work to realize the vision. And so that vision of actually creating what we call a green and thriving neighborhood, a place that really does integrate an environmental and social agenda, is what sort of binds then together the various partners that work in this place. And that allows that collaboration to take place. And for us, then, the partnership also includes how do we work to bring the right capital partners to a project of this scale and of this duration. So we ourselves manage a range of different investment products that allow us to invest in real estate in different ways. Our primary vehicle is focused on new development and sort of a 7 to 10 year time horizon in terms of the returns that we expect. We also wanted to bring in partners that could actually have capital that is interested in participating in the long term of an area like this. And so we brought a consortium of local investors alongside us. One is Novo Holdings, so they're the holding company for alongside Novo Nordisk, the pharmaceutical company, and they invest in a range of different ways, and they have a strong commitment to sustainability and better society. And they saw the investment here to be attractive commercially, but also in terms of the impact and the opportunity for the long term, and also the Industrial Workers Pension Fund that also has a strong interest in the long-term aspect. And so our role in this is to be able to orchestrate a partnership with capital that is aligned with the purpose of the project. And so that's a really fundamental way in which we work.
Yeah, totally. I mean, you mentioned this concept of green and thriving neighbourhoods, and indeed, this has gained traction really around the world. I mean, you described that a little bit, but maybe you could just tell us how this has been implemented in an OECD city outside of Copenhagen.
Yeah, so this green and thriving neighborhoods as a global movement is something that, builds on a long history, actually. You could say, of sort of post-war, urban activism for creating better neighborhoods. And so in the United States, there's people like Jane Jacobs that people might know, very famous sort of neighborhood activist in the West Village of Manhattan that sort of stood up for sort of the area of Greenwich Village as there was a sort of threat of running a freeway to destroy the old buildings and the old social fabric that existed there. And in places like Copenhagen, people like Jan Gehl that focused on sort of the quality of life and the sort of experience of pedestrians and cyclists in a city relative to sort of just paying attention to cars. And I mentioned that history because I think it is something that we actually, a green and thriving neighborhood is something that we all are very familiar with. It's places where you feel safe and comfortable as a pedestrian, where there is green infrastructure in place. There's trees on the streets. There's parks in the neighborhood. The density is truly kind of an urban scale. It is not sort of tall skyscrapers, but it is, medium scale apartment buildings mixed with places that people are working. The whole range of living options is very extensive. You will have some rental, you'll have some ownership, you have small businesses. Probably just about any favorite neighborhood that people have in a large city is likely to be a green and thriving neighborhood. And I think what has been identified in really the pandemic brought this even greater to light. Authors like Carlos Moreno in his writing about the 15-minute city is just how important it is and how desirable it is for people to have that type of neighborhood scale experience where you can, in your close proximity, get everything you need and have a really high quality of life in terms of the social connections, but also the experience of nature. And so there are tons of examples of how this is happening around the world. In Paris, there's been many ways in which neighborhood scale transformation, looking at streets in front of schools where there had been cars previously, turning those into pedestrian streets and adding greenery. A lot of this actually has been inspired by the work that's happened in cities like Bogota, Colombia, where you've had really progressive mayors for many years that have focused on adding great cycling infrastructure, adding green infrastructure, improving neighborhood scale amenities in that way. You've also different types of things in North America, cities like Vancouver, that are working now to look at how do you actually add in more density into historically single-family home neighborhoods to actually allow more opportunity then for sort of small businesses to exist and a stronger kind of neighborhood character to be created. So the list could go on. And it's something that we're really excited to be a part of. We partner with C40 Cities, international NGO, on this Green and Thriving Neighborhoods program to really support the movement and pilot projects all around the world.
Fantastic. I mean, yeah, you were talking before about some of the international organizations that you work with. I mean, indeed, financing the green transition in urban areas is a significant challenge, and there's a number of factors that need to be aligned. I mean, this is highlighted by your collaborations with some of these organizations, but I'm just wondering if there are any innovative financial mechanisms or partnerships that you've developed to bridge this investment gap in climate action. Obviously, money is central to solving or getting closer to solving the climate dilemma. And maybe you can, just tell us a story about how one of these mechanisms has enabled one of your projects at Urban Partners.
Yeah, so there's, I think we are very strong believers in sort of the role of institutional and private capital working alongside public investment and many other forms of financing to really create the change that we need in cities. And we think that's commercially sane on behalf of the institutional investment community, and we think it's beneficial to residents and citizens and places and what the world and planet needs. And I think one of the things that we observe is that when you look at how finance is managed, of course, one of the most fundamental components is the underwriting. How do you actually model and make a decision around the projected kind of costs and returns of an investment? And one of the challenges is that we don't at a policy level price, all of the factors in terms of the impacts on the planet and society that a specific investment might have. There's no, widespread in kind of policy regulated kind of carbon pricing, for example. We ourselves have taken it upon ourselves the responsibility to actually integrate into our underwriting and investment process something we call a carbon abatement reserve, where we actually had 90 euros per kilo, because there is, even with our efforts of decarbonization, some level of carbon in each of our investments. For each kilo of carbon, there is that 90 euros, and that is factored into the overall business case. And then that is money that is accrued into a reserve that is able to then be deployed against specific decarbonization initiatives and solutions. And we see that as a kind of logical and almost de-risking mechanism in our own investment process, because we do believe that there will be regulatory change on this topic. We do believe that the pricing of carbon will come, and the fact that we are already prepared with it is something that we see as an advantage in the market. And of course, we then see that as well aligned with what we believe is necessary for our cities and our planet.
Yeah, sure thing. That's great, Jesse. I mean, thanks so much for your time. I mean, the last question for today's episode of OECD Podcasts really focuses on urban generation. I mean, urban generation often brings up concerns about gentrification and social equity. Just wondering how Urban Partners balances that goal of creating high quality and sustainable neighbourhoods. We spoke before about green and thriving neighbourhoods, and how that's balanced with the need to make sure that these developments are inclusive and accessible to different communities.
Yeah, no, it's a really important topic, and I think the project that we spoke about just a little earlier, the railway district in Copenhagen, is a useful example. So in this project, this is an area where there's not a residential population today. It's an old industrial area. There are, however, many surrounding neighborhoods that actually are, and we did the research on this to inform our work, very socioeconomically diverse and representative broadly of actually the mix of Copenhagen as a whole. So you have some areas to the north that have a little higher income, another area to the south that has a larger percentage of social housing, and some new construction that has a whole range of mix of people that are living there. And I mention that because then as we think about building a new neighborhood here that sort of sits at the intersection of these neighborhoods, the focus for us is how do you create a really quality mixed place? How do you really create a place that is a sense of kind of invitation and belonging for people that have more means than people that have less means, but actually have something in common, which is the neighborhood that they share and the connections that they can create there together. And so housing is obviously a really important part of creating that inclusive community and having a diversity of housing options. And so in our case, there's 25% social housing, but then there's also different forms of ownership housing, different forms of rental housing. And that also in the social housing includes elderly care, and so different demographics within that as well. But oftentimes this topic of kind of inclusion stops at the subject of housing. And I think what's really important is to also talk about belonging. So you can have a neighborhood where you have housing of different types, but people that are in that area don't really share anything in common in terms of the neighborhood and the places that they come together. And so what we've done in this neighborhood is actually built the neighborhood around a different type of community center that we put at the very center, and have already been establishing that space in a historic building there today. It's called Sport 10. And that space is to actually create that sort of mix of uses and activities and programs that is really already, even though the residents in the neighborhood aren't there, drawing from the surrounding neighborhoods and demonstrating how you bring people together that might be interested in youth skating, also in exhibitions around culture, also in public events related to urban development, also in communal dining experiences, a really, really significant mix of uses and programs that then give a context for everybody to feel like this neighborhood is mine. I have a shared sense of connection. I can see my neighbors eye to eye, and we have a place of common meeting. And I think that's something that I think is incredibly important to do in our neighborhood work, is to link that aspect of inclusion to belonging and actually invest in social infrastructure that creates that sense of shared connection.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks so much, Jesse, for sharing some of those stories and policy aspects that you work on at Urban Partners. That brings us to the end of our OECD podcast episode for today. But thanks so much for joining us and being part of our Speaker Spotlight series. Indeed, we'll be doing a number of other podcasts with actors in urban spaces. So to listeners, keep an ear out for those pieces in the series. The OECD Local Development Forum will take place in Greater Copenhagen on the 24th and 25th of September. The theme will be Building Bridges, Shaping Tomorrow, and we'll be discussing trending topics like collaborating across borders, expanding local innovation, of course, Urban Partners very much at the forefront of innovation, and addressing local skill shortages. So to get involved, go to the OECD website and you can find the forum there under the events, or on X, hashtag #GoLocal, and do join us again soon for the OECD podcast series.
To listen to other OECD podcasts, find us on iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and SoundCloud.com/OECD.